You're listening to the Viral Volley podcast. Now here's your host, Rob, on the mic.
All right, guys, week 11 finished. We're going to look at week 12 matchups because we're seeing all conferences in play this week. Yes, including the Big West, which I think is funny. We talked about in the College Volleyball Weekly piece how Penn State's 10-0 and at Santa Barbara 3-0 in the Big West. So definitely a polarity there in the looks of conference play. But we wanted to see what matches to keep an eye on this week, what you're watching or what's on your playlist. And obviously, guys, always go to the volleyballmag.com streaming and TV listings to see where everyone's playing or even off block or whatever resource gives you the best streaming information. But key is to watch these guys playing. I'm going to jump to, we've been going with Dan first in the other segment. So I'm going to go to Jay first and leave Dave in the middle.
Nice. All right. Well, I know there's probably a couple that everybody's going to say. So I'll leave those. They're pretty standard. I'm going to be watching NJIT Princeton only because the Battle of New Jersey is always fun to watch. Those two teams, there's no love lost between them. And it's going to be a fun one to watch. Princeton is necessarily not out of anything. They're probably going to make the playoffs for EIVAs, which is good. And they got a lot of young guys that are real talented, but it'll be interesting to see on that one. I'm also going to be watching Harvard and St. Francis. St. Francis started out the year pretty hot in conference, and now they've kind of cooled off a little bit. We beat them this weekend in 3, and I know they went up to Princeton, and Princeton beat them. So they had a couple of losses. I'm interested to see how they rebound, and Harvard's a sneaky good team. They've got some pieces that can do some good things. The last one I'm going to watch, and only because I know you probably won't mention, is BYU Pepperdine. And the reason I want to watch that is Pepperdine just hung almost 3 games of single digits on Northridge. Almost. I mean, it's pretty gnarly to see a score where they didn't even get above 15 in any of them. And that was a beatdown of epic proportions. I want to see if Pepperdine can do the same thing. And that's going to be against BYU. And that's going to be a fun match for me to watch.
All right. Dave, how about you?
We can't bet because of the NCAA, but if I could bet, I'd say we're not going to put up those scores against BYU. That's just, nor that hitting efficiency. I think it was the highest hitting efficiency since 1985. So,
challenge accepted.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna throw out the one that everyone would throw out, right? Long Beach State and Santa Barbara. I just think that's going to be a good volleyball match. There's probably going to be about 900 digs. So you're going to see a lot of good volleyball being played, and that's just fun to watch, as a fan, right? There's just going to be a lot of long rallies and some good volleyball. So that one's cool. And then SC is at Stanford, I think. Mm-hmm. Is that? Yeah.
Twice. So, I think so,
yeah. Yeah. So in the MPSF, if you go play Grand Canyon, Stanford, or BYU, you're playing them twice, either at their place or they're coming twice to yours. I just want to see what Stanford does, right? Like they end up beating UCLA. Are they a team that consistently can perform, or was that a little blip on the radar? It seems like they're getting better. I'm impressed by their libero play. So, and then SC's just been so steady, right? They have 2 pins that are just consistent and show up every night for them. The issue is, as you go on in the season, if their production starts to dip a little bit, does that become problematic for them? So that should be a fun match to watch.
I wonder if they're going to be in Burnham or Maples, because that's going to make a big difference, I think, for SC, because that said Burnham, that the crowd's like right on top of you. And
I think both of them, they're right on top of you. At Maples, you got those standing seats that are right there, and usually they get some fan support from other athletes. So I think both of them are good crowds.
All right, Dan, jump in.
Well, I certainly mentioned some good ones. In Jay's conference, I'm curious to see NJIT play George Mason. So George Mason upset St. Francis. We're going to throw Jay some love here. So it's going to see if Mason can kind of recreate that against NJIT. In the Conference Carolina, as we were talking about Fred and his group, he's got, Belmont, Abbey, and Barton. Can he come away with 2 more wins and continue to push that lead in that conference a little bit from that standpoint? And then in our own conference, you got McKendree and Loyola. So McKendree beat Loyola. And so now I think it'll be interesting to see this rematch a little bit. And then Lindenwood, who has kind of been under the radar and has some nice pieces. Ohio State and Ball State both have to go to Lindenwood. And that Ohio State Lindenwood for sure is an interesting matchup in terms of that. So, yeah.
Well, Loyola at Lewis this week, right?
Yeah, it's probably a pretty big one. You know what I mean? So, but it's not my place to mention right there. So, but hey, we do have preemie night that day, so it's always a good cause, and we're raising money, and so should be a packed gym for sure.
So you have to explain to our listeners and viewers what preemie night is, Dan.
So we created a foundation about 3 years ago. Our daughter was born 1 pound 8 ounces at 24 weeks and was in an EQ 115 days, and we created this foundation called the Ray Strong Foundation. And every year there's a women's game for my wife's team and a men's game where we fundraise some dollars and then help out local families in the Chicago community, as well as hospitals and nurses. And we're actually giving a check for $5,000 to the Louise Colette Foundation. They also help out preemie families as well. And so, but yeah, certainly just trying to make an impact where we can. So
we'll definitely got to get it out there. Be sure to visit Ray Strong Foundation. I do believe it's on Facebook, and there is a website as well.
Yeah, raystrong.org. So you just look it up. Yeah.
So there's some good stuff happening here in week 12. And I think it could be a pretty big brawl fest. I mean, even the ones that you've mentioned here, there's so many other ones that we've definitely got to take a peek at through the week, because that Belmont Abbey NGU, that's a top 2, top 3 teams in Conference Carolinas right there. So, and they're coming down the end their conference play, which is so weird to hear saying, because in April's right around the corner and playoffs are happening and everyone's trying to jostle in for their position for that tournament seed. So want to thank Dave Hunt of Pepperdine, Dan Friend of Lewis, and Jay Hosick of George Mason here for College Volleyball Weekly on the Borrow Volley podcast, the continued conversation from volleyballmag.com. Good luck this week, guys, and have a great week.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Yeah. A lightning round has been requested from the crew because they've got so much wisdom and they're quick on their feet and their brains are working for some of us at 6:45 in the morning. So, well, it's different time across the nation, but we're going to go through our first topic. Conference Carolina cruising. NGU alone at the top with the only conference loss to Erskine. Do they have what it takes to claim the Conference Carolinas? We'll start with Dan, and to Dave, then to Jake.
Well, I think it'd be cool for Fred, because I think he's announced his retirement. And so if those guys could find a way to kind of finish on top, it'd be a great way for him to go out in terms of that. But I certainly think they have the pieces and they're playing some good volleyball. So, yeah.
Dave.
Yeah, my money is going to be on Mount Olive. I've probably seen them more because they've played more teams I'm familiar with, but I'm going with Mount Olive to win Conference Carolinas come tournament time.
Yep. And then Jay.
I'm going to echo both of their sentiments and say they're both going to be in the final of the Conference Carolinas.
That's
Mount Olive. Yeah, it's a very politically correct statement. Now, Mount Olive is a very solid team, and obviously, you know, their outside hitter Aziz and their setter, they're doing some really nice things. And you know, Dr. Fred Battenfield, hey, he's a Pep guy, so he and Marv back in the day worked together. You know, he's a really, really good human being and a great coach and knows how to coach those kids up and has done such a great job there building that program. It'll be really cool to see him go out on a high note like that if he's retiring this year. And yeah, I think those two teams are the ones that are going to be in the finals for sure.
All right, next question or next topic. While the Big West was sleeping, why do I call it that? Because only 2 teams are in action. That would be Cal State Northridge and Long Beach State. Big West, they're beginning to shape up the conference play. And I think a lot of things surprising have happened to this point as we've seen them playing in other conferences. But what can shake down here now that Big West kicks into gear for week 12? We'll go again, Dan, and then Dave, and then Jay.
Well, I believe Long Beach plays Santa Barbara, so that's going to be a great match to watch for sure. And I know Hawaii's got Northridge. I think Hawaii is certainly going to take both of those, but I'm excited about the Long Beach Santa Barbara match. So, and kind of seeing how that takes and what shape that takes, because we know Santa Barbara's playing some pretty good volleyball, and Long Beach has some nice pieces. So, yeah, certainly, I think Long Beach is still my favorite, you know, in terms of that. But I think, you know, we'll see how that goes. So,
all right, Dave.
Yeah, I think Long Beach and Hawaii are ahead up on everyone just in terms of physicality in that conference. You know, if they play average and other teams play really well, I think Hawaii and Long Beach State still have the ability to beat those teams. So that's a nice thing to have as a coach when you're going into matches like that. The conference tournament is in Hawaii, so I think Hawaii has a leg up in terms of a home court advantage for the conference tournament. So it seems like it's there a lot the last 2 years for sure. So I think they have a little bit of a unique advantage in that regard. But I think those are the two top teams. I think Santa Barbara's playing well, but the other two teams are a little more physical than them. But this week or whenever they play, Santa Barbara and Long Beach, we'll learn a little bit more.
Yep. Jay.
The longest 2.5 months of non-conference play in the history of mankind. And now the Big West is going to kick off their conference portion of their season, basically. I think they nailed it. I think Long Beach and Hawaii are definitely the two most physical teams. I think Santa Barbara is probably one of the best teams. And I think Santa Barbara and Long Beach are going to be the two teams in the finals of the Big West that are going to battle it out. I think Santa Barbara is just so scrappy, and they have so many, offensive weapons that at any given moment can put the ball away, and they're so fast. I mean, that's a style of play that not a lot of people are playing. They're not very big, but they're really good. So I'm really excited to watch Long Beach and Santa Barbara this week. It's going to be a fun match.
Yeah, Chalmers, Wilcoxon, Todorov. Funny enough, though, side note, looking at the conference standings, got here Penn State 10-0. You have UC Santa Barbara 3-0 in conference. So big jump in for the Big West. We're going to jump to our next conference. I'm going to call it the EIVA elevation, or for all you guys who get bothered by that, the EIVA elevation. Penn State's obviously undefeated, as I said, 10-0 in conference play, but here you have NJIT, Harvard, and St. Francis and hunt for that number 2 seed in the conference tournament. These streams are playing extremely well and looking to move up, but who's the favorite of the three to get that number 2 seed? Dan.
NJIT. NJIT is my favorite. I know they went 5 with Concordia. Julian had a pretty 31 kills or so, but NJIT is still my favorite to finish second behind Penn State. I think it'll be NJIT and Penn State in the finals, from that standpoint, and most likely Penn State taking it. But yeah, they're my pick.
It was NJIT and Charleston, I think.
Yep.
Concordia.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I meant Charleston. Yeah. So.
All right, Dave, jump in.
Yeah, Penn State is head and shoulders above the rest of the EIVA, and I think the EIVA is down this year compared to where they have been in the past. And the last few years they've been really strong, and this year they're down, and Penn State's got a lot of returners. So can they stay dialed in and keep playing good volleyball? And then it's just hard to get a feel for where they're at. Like we mentioned earlier, they played all these non-conference matches early. I wish some of those were later so we can get a good feel for where that team is. And they're winning a lot of matches, but they should be winning a lot of matches because they're playing some inferior opponents right now. Yep.
And then Jay.
I resemble that inferior opponent remark. No, I think obviously Penn State's head and shoulders above everybody else this year. NJIT is probably the most prepared team besides Penn State. And, the thing that I think Penn State has, if there's a knock on them, it's that they get to that point, and then can somebody just kind of squeak one out at the end? And they got so many veterans that have been there, done that, know what it feels like. And that's where Penn State, I think, is head and shoulders this year. NJIT is going to be somebody later on down the line that nobody's going to want to play. But I think if Penn State's hosting, it's comfortable. They seem to score a couple extra points per set with the name on the front of their jerseys. But over the years, we've shown that that's not always going to be the case. But this year, they're definitely the leaders of the pack, and we're gonna do our best. But I think NJIT is probably the next best qualified team to beat them.
Yeah, Dan had referenced the 5-setter against Charleston, and I was looking at the box scores, and they had both setters playing, Roque Nito and Grant Fissler. Was there a substitution made? I wasn't able to watch the match, so I was wondering if you guys had wind of, if there's a strategy change because they needed a bigger block than Nito, and they put in Fissler against whatever Charleston was doing, because they obviously were giving them a hard time. So, any thoughts on that match?
Yeah, I think Nito is not as physical of a blocker as Fissler, but the challenge is that Charleston's got the outside hitter Lachlan Bray from Australia, who he hits a real high ball. And if you put a matchup against him and Nito, I like Bray's chances a large portion of the time. I'm not so sure that was the reason why they made the change. I think it's more so that maybe Nito's getting back into the swing of things, and they felt comfortable enough that they were going to be able to, put the other kid in and still get the W. I don't think they wanted to go 5, obviously, but Nito hasn't played in a while, and so he's probably not in playing shape yet. But as the season wears on, he'll be fine.
Yeah. All right. Our next conference, the last two there's a lot happening in here, and this is Dan's home conference, the MIVA. We're called MIVA Madness. You got Loyola of Chicago and Ball State at 7-1. Each have to play Lindenwood, Quincy, and of course Lewis here in the upcoming weeks before they meet each other head-to-head on April 7th at Gentile Arena. What should we expect these next few weeks from these two MIVA teams? Dan.
Well, I think Loyola and Ball State kind of lead the pack for sure. You're kind of seeing a cluster of the next 4 or 5 teams, but they've kind of separated themselves, and I would be surprised if one of them's not winning league. I think it'll boil down to kind of which one hosts. I really do. I think it's going to be between those two in the end. You might get an upset by one of the other teams if you get Ohio State or McKendree, us, Linwood, any of that stuff. But I really do think it'll be those two. And if Ball State's host, I think they win. If Loyola hosts, Ball State's only won there a couple times in the past 20 years. You know what I mean? In terms of that. And so that match is interesting at Gentile coming up in a few weeks. But both those guys have to stay clean against some of these other tough opponents. I mean, they lose one here or there, then they're not hosting at home in the end, and that could hurt them in terms of that. So I think that'll be a key component.
Yep. Dave.
Yeah, I agree with Dan in terms of a lot of times it's not about who you beat, but it's about who can you avoid the bad loss, right? So did you beat the teams that you were supposed to beat? And Ball State maybe hasn't won there in 20 years, but they got a new coach. He doesn't know that, and he's doing a great job with that group. And you're seeing them, I mean, other than their opposite, right, that they had picked up that didn't get to play last year. I mean, those pieces have been there for them, but they're playing different volleyball. And that's what a fresh look can do for you sometimes. So, yeah, I haven't seen either of those teams enough to know who's going to pull it out, but I know that Loyola was picked to win that conference originally. So I'd probably say they're still my favorite.
Yep. And then Jay.
Donan's changed the culture there. Ball State is now, I don't want to say they've never been before, but they're now in a moment where they're feeling like, hey, we belong at the big dance, and we belong to be champions, and we belong to beat anybody anytime. So you get that kind of mentality going through, and guys have bought into it. It obviously seems like they're a dangerous team. And I think Dan nailed it. It's whoever's hosting, I mean, you're comfortable, right? You're in your gym, you're in your own bed, you got all the accoutrement, if you will, that make you feel like you're just in a comfortable spot. So that could be a real game changer. But yeah, if either Loyola or Ball State are in somebody else's gym, they're just as good. I think they could pull off a win just as easily.
That was a pretty big word for somebody that has a sign in the back that says, "I drank what?"
That's right. Well, if you remember, that was Socrates' last famous line. So I've got a little bit of an education. Got a master's degree. Got a master's degree.
Damn.
Well, I want to add that, I don't know if you guys remember that old 80s song, Send Me an Angel. Ball State has Angelos Mandalaris, and talk about how that's when he's on the court, changes that team. They become so much stronger. They're good with Caleb Jeunesse, but I mean, when Angelos is on the court, you got to focus so much effort on him as well. So, and then of course we were looking at Loyola's Cole Schlotthauer. Started off the season, had an early injury, and who stepped up? PVB, Parker Van Buren. So that's gonna be an interesting match to watch in the end.
That's the other piece is you got a freshman who has fantastic numbers on the opposite, but you got an All-American on the opposite international guy and a 4 or 5 year other outside. I just think that's going to weigh out in the end, just my opinion, and a senior 5th, 6th year setter. So, but yeah.
Yep. Well, our final conference, we're going to look at the MPSF Dave's home conference. And I thought I'd bring up this great graphic, again, brought up by our friend over at Volley Venue. He looked at it at such a great way. He called it and if you haven't seen it, you got to go on to Instagram and see it. It's called MPSF's Circle of Parody. So I'm going to read the caption that's in there. It says, with Stanford's upset of number 1 UCLA last week, the MPSF is the first men's D1-2 conference to complete its Circle of Parody. This means that UCLA beat GCU, GCU beat Pepperdine, Pepperdine beat SC, SC beat BYU, BYU beat Concordia Concordia beat Stanford and Stanford beat UCLA. Who wins the conference this season? Yeah, we'll start with Dan.
Well, I think it's Pepperdine and UCLA in the final. So how does that work on the host for these guys? Is it the highest seed or is it like the Big West?
Highest seed. Yeah, the highest seed. Yep.
So I think it's those two in the finals. I do think SC and GCU are going to be right there. And some people are probably thinking, well, how do you not have SC in the final? But I've got Pep and UCLA in terms of that. And so I think it's going to be tough. I think this second round of conference play for them, and who's coming up? It's BYU at Pep, and then GCU at Concordia. And so Concordia can be that spoiler too, that can kind of get a couple of other wins coming down the road here as well. So,
all right, over to Dave.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good matchups coming up. We have to play UCLA and BYU. UCLA has to play us and SC, and I mean, that's the deal. When you have 12 conference matches, there's a lot riding on all of them. So I think it's going to come down to the last week to see who's going to end up hosting. And then it just, our conference tournament takes place over 4 days. So who could be good over those 4 days? So we'll see. I think a lot of teams, Dan just hit on that. A lot of teams have shown that they're good. Stanford, has talent as well, right? And Concordia goes and battles. And I know Riley doesn't have all the talent that he will in a few years, but he's doing a great job of getting them to play good volleyball. So top to bottom, I think it's going to be tough. The conference winner gets a bye for the first day, and then they're right into it. So I don't think we're similar to the Big West. Nobody's really played enough conference matches to know who's going to end up winning conference, at least the regular season. But it's going to be a fun postseason.
Yep. And then to Jay.
In the words of one of my favorite coaches, Dan, you made a great reference to a couple of teams that'll be in the finals, but not so fast, my friend. I don't think it's going to be Pepperdine in the finals. I think it's going to be SC UCLA. Not that I don't think Pepperdine's a good team, and obviously they've beaten USC, so that's not what I'm saying. But I think SC and UCLA over the course of the season have shown that they are the two teams to be reckoned with. I think Pepperdine and Stanford are the next, and Grand Canyon are the next 2 or 3 teams that could upset somebody at any given moment. And I think Concordia and I think BYU are going to be towards the bottom of the pack. And if they get hot at the right moment, they can do some things. But I think it's going to be USC, UCLA in the finals. And either one of those teams I think can win.
Yep.
I'm gonna jump on and add on to what Jay said. I think BYU, because they hit a streak. Everyone sleeps on them a little bit, but when you watch them on video, they're going to be a handful for somebody. My guess is they get an upset win in the first round in the MPSF playoffs, because they're just, obviously something happened where they just missed their starting setter, right? So that's going to cause some problems, but they have a lot of good pieces. And if the setting situation gets smoothed out, it's going to be problematic for a lot of teams.
If there's the MPSF tournament, give the 1-2 seed a bye in that first round?
Just the 1 seed. Just with having an odd number of teams. It's just the 1 seed. So we play Wednesday, then semifinals are Thursday, then there's a day off, and then Saturday.
So BYU could end up as high as the 5 seed, and then they would end up playing the 4 seed. Is that what it would work out?
I think they've only played 4 conference matches, right? GCU and Concordia. So they can end up, pretty high, because I think we all have 4 conference matches.
Yeah. All right. Here's a final topic of our rundown. Top athletes of the week. Dan, go.
Oh gosh, Angelo Mandelaris led him to 2 wins against Ohio State. Had a big alumni thing for Don Shondell, and then Quinn Isaac along with him on those teams. 2 key wins for them against a big conference rival that's down the street. So,
okay, Dave.
I got to go with my own guy, Alex Gettinger. I think he hit 700 for the week. His first match starting this year, he comes out and hits 6 something, and then he follows that up by hitting 800, 13 for 15 on Friday night. So, even those numbers against anybody are impressive. So he did a nice job.
Yep. And then Jay.
I got to give this kid some love. He hasn't gotten enough all season. Cole Bogner from Penn State, the setter, does a real nice job throwing the rock around the gym. He's a great leader on the court. He's emotional. He's fiery. He's a competitor. And he just never, there's never a moment that it seems like they're out of system, and that's scary. And reminds me a lot of a young Tyler Hildebrand, where you almost want the pass or the dig to be out away from the net, so to speak, just to see the kind of creativeness he can do. He's a great setter. You're going to see him play professionally, I'm sure, after his career is done. I wish it were this year that he was done. I think he's coming back for another year, but and he should get a shot at the national team at some point. The kid's legit good.
There we go. After 11 weeks of NCAA D1-2 men's volleyball action, that's Dave Hunt of Pepperdine, Dan Friend of Lewis, and Jay Hosick of George Mason. Good luck in week 12, and thanks for coming on, guys.
Thanks.
See ya.